In December 2024, under a cold grey sky, Garda quietly staged a midnight stop on a remote stretch of the M9 outside Dublin. They flagged down a delivery truck and found cocaine hidden in a secret compartment. On the asphalt, blocks of cocaine were laid out by forensics, along with 4 handguns, silent evidence that a vast drug pipeline had been uncovered. What stunned officers even more was discovering who owned this cargo. It belonged not to the familiar Kinahan cartel, but to a Dublin crew calling itself the Family. Until this moment, the Family had been little more than a whisper on police wanted lists. Suddenly, with this bust, the gang was thrust into the limelight. Veteran reporters asked in disbelief how it could be possible that, after a decade dominated by the bloody Kinahan-Hutch feud, a new gang had amassed such fortunes. As the Irish Times put it, it would have been unthinkable at any juncture since the cocaine boom began that anyone apart from the Kinahans could gather that much money. Irish media scrambled to explain it. A Sunday tabloid even called the Family Dublin's second most powerful crime gang, second only to the Kinahans. By early 2025, Dublin crime pages were filled with the gang's name. One front-page story proclaimed the end of an era, noting the Family had effectively replaced the Kinahans as Ireland's #1 crime network. In interviews, police mused that it was like watching a corporate takeover of the drug trade. Behind the scenes, authorities were almost gleeful. The timing was perfect. As the Kinahan empire crumbled, the Family quietly moved in to fill the void. Records show several Kinahan lieutenants fled abroad or were jailed, leaving a power vacuum. As one Garda veteran observed, after decades of gangland killings, the killing stopped, and the Family thrived by not picking up the gun. They played the long game, focusing on profit instead of bullets. In the months that followed, every major Garda operation was suspiciously linked back to these men. Investigators treated the bust as intelligence-led. Wiretaps on encrypted networks and informants had finally given them the signal. By spring 2025, even government briefings used the Family's name. Political leaders publicly assured the public the gang would be hit hard. On the streets, residents were already whispering, this was the gang with all the answers. It wasn't just Ireland taking notice, European police agencies flagged the news. One of the continent's largest cocaine intercepts of the year had Ireland's fingerprints all over it. The Spanish and UK media ran small stories. Irish gang behind massive Dublin cocaine bust, read a Spanish headline. In Britain, tabloids published blurred images of seized cars, speculating about British connections. It was rare for Dublin's crime scene to reach international headlines, but now it did. Even agencies like Interpol noted the development. That an Irish crew had built what looked like a cartel was now part of the story they shared with other countries. All this set the stage. In early 2025, the Family's story was no longer an inside joke among detectives. It was front-page news across Ireland. The question for the nation and for us as journalists became, how did a suburban gang become the hidden masters of Ireland's drugs trade? That mystery drives the narrative of this episode. Ballyfermot is not a twilight zone, it's a Dublin suburb like any other, with rows of modest houses, shops and schools. But by the 1990s, it had become a centre of Ireland's heroin crisis. Community workers and doctors reported addicts dying in the street and children picking up needles for the first time. It was into this troubled backdrop that 2 brothers found their start. More than 2 decades ago, meaning the brothers began dealing around the late 90s. Back then, they ran small-time deals in pubs and on street corners, completely off the radar of national headlines, but all too visible locally. By 2002, the Grendon brothers' ambition had grown. Brian Grendon, aged 25, was convicted in Ireland for coordinating a $1.5 million heroin shipment. A decade later, Philip Grendon was caught in Spain with $3.8 million worth of cocaine in his hotel room. Those prison stints could have ended their careers. Instead, the brothers returned to Dublin stronger and more connected. Investigators believe they used those years behind bars to make contacts and plan. When Philip walked out in 2019, he returned with new associates in Turkey and Eastern Europe. It's widely believed their time inside helped solidify an international supply line. By 2020, Garda sources say the family was operating one of Ireland's most prolific drug-dealing networks, handling heroin, cocaine and cannabis across the country. Locals say the Gangland brothers attended funerals and soccer matches right here, keeping a low profile. Meanwhile, they had built the backbone of a cartel. Bank ledgers discovered in raids list thousands of euros in payments to front shops and nightclubs. And they ran the operation under cover of ordinary life. By the late 2010s, the network had grown from a local heroin ring into a nationwide syndicate. Drugs from Asia and South America poured through Europe and quietly arrived in Dublin. The family's couriers moved them by van all over Ireland. Detectives later remarked that dealers in Cork and Limerick were suddenly getting better supplies than ever because they had started buying from the family's new wholesale route. One observer put it as a corporate joke. The family used Ballyfermot as their branch office, and Ireland was their nationwide market. Local law enforcement is now convinced the family's leadership really is family. Garda reports identify 5 men as the core of the gang, including the 3 Gangland brothers, and emphasize they are all Irish-born Ballyfermot natives. One of the brothers is widely believed to be the overall boss, while another brother and a cousin manage day-to-day operations. A 4th brother is also implicated, though he escaped recent raids. In short, it's a tight circle bound by blood. Unlike many loose street crews, the family trusts only insiders. They run this criminal enterprise out of West Dublin, but they project power far beyond one neighborhood. The brothers invested their cash in fronts, shops, pubs, and especially a high-end car garage in Clondalkin. From those fronts, they organized the deals. Plain white vans would roll out with packages and return filled with money. Gauging surveillance, sources say in 2024, those vans were spotted in Kildare and Cork, picking up loads and bringing them north. In Belfast, data from road sensors matched some vehicles that later delivered shipments to Dublin. The family's reach was effectively national. They also enforced unwritten turf lines. For example, Garda intelligence reports that a rival gang from North Dublin tried moving into Cabra and Blanchardstown, an area traditionally outside the family's zone. The result was a flurry of low-level violence. Cars burned, intimidation notes left at homes, windows smashed. The family responded with covert hits on the rival gang's couriers, burglary of stash houses, for instance, rather than public gunplay. It was a subtle message: we can go after you, but we won't announce it. In short, the family's territory is enforced by intimidation, not headlines. Effectively, to be on the family's side, you simply had to work with them. Dealers in Ballyfermot and Clondalkin now pay taxes to this gang. One Garda source revealed that even petty thieves selling pills for profit must first clear it with the family's bosses or risk a violent response. This system is every bit as powerful as any marked turf line on a map. In practice, it makes West Dublin a de facto fiefdom of the family. Behind the scenes, the family's operation resembles a private corporation. They manage huge shipments of drugs, from cocaine to heroin to cannabis. Garda analyses illustrate the scale. In early 2025 alone, raids traced to the family netted 182 cars of cocaine, worth about $14 million, dozens of other big busts of powder and pills. These weren't flukes. Detectives say they were routine shipments in the gang's calendar. One Irish report sums it up bluntly. The family operate one of Ireland's most prolific drug-dealing networks, generating millions a year in illegal profits. They built this network through multiple routes. For heroin, Garda say the gang dealt with contacts in Turkey and Eastern Europe. For cocaine, shipments arrived via South American channels into Europe, then were brought across the Atlantic by ship or ferry. Key to cracking the gang was technology. In 2023, French investigators cracked an encrypted messaging network used by cartels worldwide, known as Ghost, and found around 100 active users in Ireland. Shared intelligence revealed that some of those addresses and calls belonged to the family's lieutenants, effectively mapping out their supply lines. Within Ireland, the family ran a countrywide distribution grid. After arrivals, bulk loads were split at safe houses and forwarded to dealers nationwide. Smaller cities like Waterford or Galway suddenly reported surges in supply because local pushers were receiving packages from the family's vans. In Dublin, the system was more elaborate. Multiple stash houses, some disguised as ordinary homes or businesses, stored kilogram packets, which were then handed off to street-level dealers on motorcycles or cars. A traffic camera record once showed dozens of pickups in Ballyfermot in a single week tied to that garage front, a mechanistic reminder that drugs were flowing constantly. Think of the family's logistics like any big business's supply chain. They even used business-like codes. Detectives noted that encrypted texts referred to fruit and vegetables for heroin, cocaine, they guessed, and events for major shipments. Intercepted messages discussed dates and amounts as if they were project deadlines. By piecing these terms together, Garda analysts essentially created a supply chain chart. Only the cargo was drugs, not widgets. For our narrative, this underscores a chilling fact. These criminals behaved more like corporate managers than gangsters. Lockdowns during COVID-19 only reinforced their approach. When pubs and clubs closed, police expected dealers to suffer. Instead, Garda noticed that the trends put to bed any idea that drugs were only a pub and club problem. Users still wanted product. The family, with its established network, simply switched to delivery and home sales. When restrictions eased, they emerged stronger in the market. In other words, even a national crisis couldn't stop their pipeline. All that drug trade produced enormous cash. Garda sources estimate the family took in tens of millions of euro per year. The Criminal Assets Bureau, CAB, has long pursued them. One report notes CAB has targeted the family for at least 10 years. In practice, that meant gradual asset seizures. Raids have turned up houses, safe deposit boxes, and piles of cash. In one office, officers found $500,000 stuffed into bags, money the gang had hoped to stash away. Investigators also seized luxury vehicles, sports cars, SUVs, bought on thick criminal receipts. Every high-end watch or set of gold bars they recovered was a trophy as well as an indictment of how much wealth was at play. The family's strategy had been to funnel money into Ireland. That included buying property. As of this episode, courts have frozen at least a handful of houses and apartments believed bought with the family's profits. While owners often deny knowledge, the timing of purchases, often just before a major drugs arrest, raises suspicion. Even some bank accounts were closed by institutions after suspicious activity reports, effectively cutting gang members off from normal financial channels. This legally sanctioned inconvenience might seem small, but for a crime network, it's a big block on laundering cash. They also spent lavishly. On camera, Garda showed reporters seized contraband, including designer clothes, stacks of $50 bills, and crates of liquor, signs of how they lived. In 2024, it was widely reported that the gang spent hundreds of thousands on luxury cars and watches. Detectives quipped that if the family were a legitimate company, they would rank among the wealthiest firms in West Dublin. This conspicuous consumption was a trap. Each asset left a forensic trail. For instance, the smash and grab of a $100,000 sports car by Garda in 2023 added another nail to their coffin. The upshot, the family's pipeline of income was being choked. One undercover source told the Sunday Independent that the gang started to panic in late 2024 as big stashes kept disappearing in seizures. He said they were finding it big trouble to pay off their network. The floods of money they were used to were suddenly running dry. By 2025, sources say the organization was in crisis. The money map was now being redrawn by the state, not by them. Remarkably, the family rose without the public shootouts that once terrorized Dublin. Instead, their violence was quieter, targeted, often hidden. For example, Garda inquiries uncovered a disturbing scheme. The family would recruit teenagers into selling small amounts of drugs on credit, then stage a robbery of the teen's own stash. The result was the teen or his family suddenly owing thousands. Unable to pay, they faced threats or beatings. One report specifically noted this tactic, using kids as pawns and then extorting them. The psychological cruelty of that plot has drawn particular outrage in coverage. We do know of at least one public shooting linked to this gang. In December 2024, Garda foiled an attempt to assassinate a known rival gunman in West Dublin. The target was injured but survived. Police say this hit was ordered by the family or their affiliates, as the would-be assassins had been tracked at the family's stash houses. Afterward, detectives remarked how close the city had come to another gangland bloodbath. The arrested attackers had purchased guns on the black market, a reminder that if needed, the family could tap into lethal force. Garda also found real weapons. In a 2023 raid on a supposed family safehouse, officers uncovered 4 loaded handguns plus ammunition. One newspaper later reported that the 25 kilos of cocaine seized in that raid rattled the gang's leadership, implying they were preparing a major move. These guns never made headlines in a shooting, but their presence underscored the potential for violence. Detectives later said that drug traffickers often rent murder services. What mattered was that the gang had the means if they chose. What's interesting is that by the time the family consolidated control, overall gangland killings in Ireland had plummeted. At the peak of earlier feuds, 2010-15, Ireland saw around 15-20 gang murders a year. By 2024, Dublin had only a couple, many unrelated to drugs. Senior Garda officers noted grimly that Irish criminals learned a lesson. The old way of gunning down opponents simply brought police down on everyone. The family exemplified this new caution. They took the quieter path, seducing the market instead of draining it in blood. Still, a brewing conflict remains. In early 2025, Garda sources reported that a splinter group, young dealers once allied with the family, had begun encroaching on their territory. This escalated to a string of robberies and arson attacks in North Dublin suburbs. It hasn't yet become an all-out turf war, but detectives worry it could be Dublin's newest gang feud. If so, the family's silence might end, and then the violence could escalate. For ordinary people in Ballyfermot and beyond, the family's presence has been devastating. It's not just the addicts on the streets who suffer, it's the whole neighborhood. Families report living in fear. One mother of 3 quietly told a reporter that gang enforcers had threatened to burn down her house if her son didn't pay up. Social workers say calls from worried parents have doubled. The picture that emerges is of small communities under siege. Neighbors glancing anxiously at the curb for strangers, parents double-checking their kids' bags. The gang's tactics have inflicted particular harm on youth. Local youth centers report many teens who just vanished into dealing or addiction. Garda have documented cases of school-aged children being robbed at knife point of their supposedly earned money. In one tragic example, a 16-year-old who became addicted after dabbling in dealing later appeared in court accused of serious offenses, a cycle of victim becoming offender. Nurses in emergency rooms have seen spikes in young overdose patients and self-harm, knowing their problems often started with a knock on the door from someone wanting payment. Communities are fighting back as best they can. Support groups have formed, neighbors volunteer to check on each other during raids. Local schools now hold extra drug awareness programs, with Garda visiting to talk frankly to students. One youth counselor noted a grim joke among teens: better a burglar in the living room than a family debt enforcer. It captures how deeply the fear has sunk in. Nevertheless, activists remain determined. They campaign for sports facilities, after-school clubs, and counseling programs as alternatives for vulnerable kids. Some have successfully lobbied for a satellite police station in the area, hoping a visible cop presence will deter criminals. In the media and among politicians, the debate has broadened. Commentators ask hard questions. Why did it take so long to see this gang? Are social conditions partly to blame? Opinion pieces on a side say that without investment in Ballyfermot, jobs, housing improvements, mental health services, any gang could eventually thrive. Others say this is a law and order issue and celebrate the Garda's success. The clash of views is now part of the story. For our documentary, we highlight both sides: the economic and ethical context that allowed the family to rise, and the human toll their reign has taken on communities. Ireland's police force has responded with everything they have. Over the past 2 years, the family was made a top priority. Specialized units, the Garda National Drugs and Organised Crime Bureau, the Emergency Response Teams, and the Criminal Assets Bureau all collaborated. Surveillance of suspected addresses went 24/7. Analysts combed through cell tower records and financial transactions. By late 2024, it became clear to detectives that the operation required a full assault. The climax came in March 2025. Codenamed Operation Prime, it saw synchronized dawn raids in Ballyfermot, Clondalkin and beyond. Armored vans blocked streets. Emergency response unit teams with battering rams crashed through doors. In minutes, 5 suspects, including the reputed boss and his 2 brothers, were handcuffed in bed. Phones and laptops were seized. TV cameras caught the scene. One officer radioed out, "Suspect down," as a man in pajamas was led out. Across Ireland that morning, headlines announced that the family's core had fallen. But even as the guns cleared, the intelligence work continued. Garda officers credited international cooperation for the breakthrough. In 2023, when French police took down the Ghost network, they passed on intercepts that pointed to Ireland. The FBI and Europol exchanged data on suspicious money flows tied to Irish IDs. Ireland even worked with the UK and Norway to track some small shipments. In effect, this was a global manhunt honed on a local target. Legal authorities are now preparing lengthy trials. Prosecutors have invoked Ireland's new gangland laws against these men, charges like directing an organised criminal group and participating in a criminal organisation. Those statutes carry maximum penalties far harsher than standard drug charges. If the convictions stick, some could face decades behind bars. Garda have publicly vowed to tie up every loose end: the foot soldiers, the money men, everyone. In press briefings, they called the case the biggest blow to organised crime in years. The family's saga has become a national phenomenon. Newspapers and TV news continually update the story, breaking down each raid and arrest. Crime podcasts have entire series on The Family Files. On one true crime radio program, a commentator mapped the family's supply routes on the air, sounding like a thriller novelist. From South America's shores to these Dublin docks, they moved tons of poison until the cops showed the next morning. Television talk shows have invited criminologists and Dublin locals to debate the fallout, and even late-night comedy shows have satirized the quiet suburb-turned-cartel. In print, investigative journalists have pieced together the timeline. The Irish Times devoted a front-page feature to the family, explicitly linking it to the 2016 Regency Hotel murders, essentially tracing the story back to the Regency, as analysts said. In other words, the media narrative draws a line. One gang war ended in 2016, another began quietly, then exploded now. Social media buzzed with hashtags like #OurFamilyGang. Armchair detectives posted blurry photos, often misidentified, of the suspects in daily life, attending football games or church as if nothing was happening. Press coverage has focused on the human angle too. Articles quoted neighbors who recognized one of the brothers from childhood or remembered hearing a strange noise on a raid night. Editorialists have used the case to debate public policy. One columnist wrote that Ballyfermot's families deserved better than to feel terror in their own homes. Another opined that the family's story is Ireland's cautionary tale and urged readers to support more community programs. In short, the media is framing this as both a police victory and a wake-up call for society. As this episode goes to air, the family is wounded but not defeated. Its top members sit in holding cells under gang crime charges, and even now they debate strategy in their legal teams. Several high-level lieutenants remain at large, either laying low in Ireland or believed to be overseas. Gardaí continue to make smaller arrests of suspects linked to them. In one recent operation, detectives froze $200,000 in a Dublin property owned by a close associate. The picture on the ground is of a dismantled but still dripping network. The statistics tell the story. Ireland's cocaine seizures in 2024 were at record highs, mostly attributed to intercepting the family's shipments. Dublin's daily street deals have reportedly fallen. One Garda official admitted off-camera that the organisation is in crisis after losing so many key players. Families say addicts who once easily found supply now scramble, and middlemen face real pressure. Still, experts warn that this is not the last chapter. In Ireland, gangland successions are common. A veteran detective bluntly noted, "When one leader goes down, another will eventually fill the void." Already, smaller factions are eyeing Ballyfermot territory and the drug lines. If one emerges and follows the same playbook, family ties, buried deals, we'll hear its name next. For now, though, the family's grip has loosened. The bigger takeaway is a sobering one. Irish organised crime is adaptive. The state's combination of policing and asset seizures has shown results, but it must be paired with social measures too, say analysts. Community leaders stress that without jobs, education and support in suburbs like Ballyfermot, the cycle will continue. In other words, cracking this gang is a win, but only one step. The question now is how Ireland prevents the next gang from emerging in its place. Thank you for watching and supporting our channel. Bringing a story like this to light takes a lot of work, and it only matters because you care. Every view, every like and subscription helps us continue investigating and exposing hidden issues like these. We truly appreciate your support. Please stay safe, look out for each other, and we'll see you next time.